I have never seen a man whose bearing was so provoking and intolerable. He was domineering, impetuous, passionate, full of boundless self-confidence. Vain, treacherous, and morose, a powerful, shaggy, untamed old man. These are some of the ways that Marx's contemporaries described him. Marx was a German Jew, studied philosophy and law, married a minor aristocrat, was forced by his political activities to move from Germany to France to Belgium, finally to settle in Britain, where a Prussian police spy described his life. Marx lives in one of the worst, therefore one of the cheapest quarters of London. In the whole apartment, there is not one clean and solid piece of furniture. In private life, he is an extremely disorderly, cynical human being and a bad host. He leads a real gypsy existence. Washing, grooming, and changing his linen are things he does rarely, and he is often drunk. Though he's often idle for days on end, he will work day and night with tireless endurance when he has a great deal of work to do. Much of Marx's work was done in the British Museum, using this vast library to research and write a complex, far-reaching, interconnected series of books, pamphlets, articles, and manifestos. They're aimed not so much at a moral protest at the evils of capitalism, as at a cool, dispassionate analysis of how capitalism actually works, how it came about, and how it can be changed. For this reason, his key theoretical work is called, not as you might expect, socialism, but Capital. It's a book that the Russian censors pronounced so boring that they let it through, but it's no museum piece. Hidden within its sometimes forbidding prose is the promise of revolution. It was a starting point for a chain of ideas that have inspired a world movement. Workers of all lands unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains, Marx wrote in the Communist Manifesto. These are the industrial working class to whom Marx addressed himself. His writing was aimed at their emancipation. It was rooted in the material reality of their lives. Marx began by examining human labor. The exercise of labor power, labor, is the worker's own life activity, and this life activity he sells to another person in order to secure the necessary means of subsistence. He works in order to live. For Marx, the capitalist hired the worker's labor power in order to extract a surplus from it. And there was a built-in conflict between the workers and the capitalists who exploited them, a class struggle. Nothing new, he wrote, because one fact is common to all past ages, the exploitation of one class by another. The key thing about any society was who provided labor power, who owned the means of production, and how this relationship was organized. In capitalism, for instance, the workers don't own the factories, the means of production, so they must sell their labor as a commodity to those who do, who extract a surplus from their labor. In the same way, in feudal society, the serfs were tied to the land and obliged to hand over a part of what they produced to the lord of the manor. And in slave society, the slaves themselves were physically owned by their masters, who also owned what they produced with their labor. For Marx, the difference between capitalism and previous systems was its phenomenal productiveness and dynamism. Marx believed that the pumping out of surplus from the workers' labor power gave capitalism its revolutionary force, allowing it to reinvest the surplus and expand, harnessing the new technologies of the industrial age, shattering older ways of organizing society, drawing men, women, and children from off the land into the new forms of factory production. Capitalism adapted workers to the disciplines of factory labor, fixing them in their place. In Marx's words, it transformed the living worker into a mere living accessory of the machine. In so doing, capitalism had produced a new kind of human being, the industrial worker, the proletariat. For Marx, workers were alienated or separated from both the products of their labor and from the surplus expropriated by the capitalist. Their working lives were fragmented by the division of labor. They were split off from other workers through competition. They had lost a sense of being at home in the world they themselves had created. Instead, their lives were overshadowed by the alien force of capital, feeding off their living labor. Marx wrote, "Capital is dead labor that, vampire-like, lives only by sucking living labor, and lives the more labor it sucks." And yet he believed capitalism was to be its own gravedigger. Behind the dynamism and productiveness of capitalism, Marx saw the appalling conditions it offered to working men and women, living cramped in overcrowded tenements with open sewers, crippled by hunger, illness, and debt, and by the constant fear of unemployment, slumps, and crises of capitalism. Marx believed that the experience of capitalism would begin to unify the proletariat as a class. He wrote, "With the development of industry, the proletariat not only increases in number, it becomes concentrated in greater masses. Its strength grows, and it feels that strength more." Marx believed that the workers would increasingly abandon attempts at compromise and reform. They would challenge the capitalist system through trade unions and political parties. These industrial and political struggles would produce a class-conscious labor movement that would finally overthrow capitalism. Marx rooted his analysis in the realities of 19th century industry, partly learned from his friend Engels, a mill owner in Manchester, then the hub of world production.
Starvation dragged down the mouth and cheek.